And we are back in Senate Education Thursday, March 31st, 3:55 p.m. Ms. Keller, we're trying to understand the training that would be involved to get teachers and other educational personnel up to speed on this piece of the special ed bill that some people believe should be postponed. We're also hearing from a lot, implementation should be postponed. We're hearing from a lot of people that think it should go into effect right away. And so we're trying to understand how do you get teachers where they need to be so that we could actually stick with the date as is? Is this a week's training, a day's training, a year's training? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, thank you for the question. I think that one of the big challenges right now in the field overall is the move to a model that disallows this discrepancy model, and with an emphasis on evidence-based intervention approach, is that it absolutely involves a school system. You know, this is not a special education soul-based situation. You know, general ed needs to be at the table. School leadership needs to be at the table. So many of the evidence-based interventions that will be utilized within making an eligibility determination are happening in general education. And I think that's where some of the challenge lies. What we have been able to provide right now is access to resources in the form of groups in New England, experts, national experts in the area of response to intervention, in using multi-tiered systems of support that train districts, that train regions in these practices, that districts can utilize their IDEA funds, their ESSER funds, their ARP funds to be able to access particular trainers. We were focused primarily on response to intervention or scientific research-based intervention, since the field initially was very strongly focused on utilizing their existing multi-tiered systems of support and intersecting them with their special ed work. But over the past couple of months, we've also heard that districts are considering using an alternative-based solution, which is appropriate under the law. For an example, patterns of strengths and weaknesses, which is another model, a different model. It's a model that gets to that achievement. And we've also identified national experts in the area of patterns and strengths and weaknesses that we have vetted, talked with. They know Vermont, what we're going through with the removal of the discrepancy model, who are able to assist right away. And those folks have talked about these can be trainings that happen within a region. This can be ongoing coaching throughout the year. So to date, that's the information we've been providing to districts, in addition to the training we're doing on the tools, the checklists, the worksheets that districts can utilize to get to making those eligibility determinations. We also have a training, we also have a contract with a national provider that with expertise in multi-tiered systems of support, who's creating a manual about how to use your existing systems and data to make thoughtful, targeted, effective eligibility determinations across all disability categories. And that will come with trainings as well. And that project is in May. So those are some of the things to date. But going back to what the real challenge that districts are expressing is that there's a feeling that this is happening in a siloed way, that special education teams are bearing the burden of implementing this rule change, and that it needs to be a partnership. It needs to be effective communication and collaboration across the school system. So, that will take some time. I agree. And we, the trainings that we have been offering once, twice, three times a month have been open for all teams. We have been encouraging from the beginning that special education leaders are bringing their curriculum coordinators, that are bringing their principals, bringing gen ed partners to the table. And we have found that, primarily attendance has been special ed specific. And so that's another piece, is that not everybody is hearing the information. And so there needs to be another round of dissemination and heightened awareness about all of the resources that we have on our professional development technical assistance rule change website. But so that seems to be the piece. We've also done a needs assessment with the field. We had 57 respondents across special ed, school psychologists, a couple of curriculum coordinators, finding out specifically what are your needs, so we can be, taking those into consideration as we move forward, because we continue to provide outreach on these topics. And it really is around, elements of these evidence-based practices that involve interventions that are happening in gen ed, and standing up those systems so that these data are used, in addition to the professional judgment that we now allow as part of adverse effect and specific learning disability. That professional judgment and clinical judgment is an important tool. So we've also had outreach with the school psychology association to get a pulse of where they are. And, districts are still determining which approach they're going to use. We didn't mandate one within the law, and that's not uncommon. A majority of states who are not using the discrepancy model will allow for that response to intervention and problems-based approach, or an alternative method like the patterns of strengths and weaknesses. There are other states that are just response to intervention, and that makes it a little easier, to be completely honest, because if everybody is using that one approach, you can do a top-down statewide, scientific research-based intervention model for all students that involve gen ed and special ed. But where there is professional discretion of what approach they're taking, that makes it a bit difficult to provide multiple and different trainings in a short period of time. I don't know if my testimony is getting to your question, but there's some complexities here, and I'll just finalize that by saying, and we need to ensure that school teams, collaborative school teams, are at the table doing this work together. And this is an opportunity to strengthen the relationship between gen ed and special ed as a result of the rule change.
So please go, Senator Hooker.
So thank you, and thank you, Jackie. It sounds as if there's no answer to this, like how long does it take, or what is this training like, if there are many different ways of doing the training or many different approaches. But has there been any, do we know what other states do and the timing that other states use when implementing these systems?
Yes, actually, before going into this, 9 months of work, we interviewed 12 different states who had removed the discrepancy model. And we found out in advance, the type of approaches and types of training that they used to help inform what we were doing. It's been over this past year, what has been, I want to choose my words carefully, what has become apparent is that Vermont is different in how we approach multi-tiered systems of support. We have, Vermont has a broad framework, and there is a lot of professional discretion in that model of how it is utilized within a district. So even with the approach like I spoke to with response to intervention, that's something like I'm qualified to do across the state. But where the models of MTSS are different and there's lack of consistency across our districts, that can be difficult. Districts in some cases are not even using the same language or terms. Some people are using tiers, some people are using layers, some people are using, whatever they're describing to the support that they're using with students. So that's become apparent over this year, and it's making people really reflective and thinking about their systems. This is certainly not all districts. There are some districts that are ready to go. There are some districts that have really refined their current practice around multi-tiered systems of supports. They have educational support teams that are working in tandem with special ed teams. It's just a light has been shown that is not a consistent practice from place to place, which has created that the excitement about the rule change work. Some states, Connecticut, for example, they ended up mandating that everybody's going to use scientific research-based intervention. And this involved general ed and special ed, and all children were under an SRBI model, which looks exactly like a response to intervention model, only it's for all kids. And that was one of the solutions that they had. And they had a year to implement that particular approach, but they had a law that mandated that particular approach, and there was 1 year to get it together, and it's an approach that they still have today. The response to intervention model, if your multi-tiered systems of support are with fidelity, allowing professionals to collect the necessary data that you can plug into those worksheets and checklists that we have created and modeled after other successful states. If those MTSS systems response to intervention is could be a week-long training, if your system can support that approach. Patterns of strength and weakness is the example of another alternate-based approach that some of our districts are considering. That really, to do it with fidelity, there should be like a pilot period if you have not been utilizing that methodology. And that's a generalization. It also depends on your expertise of your school psychologist or your educational psychologist that, was prepared in that approach in graduate school, needing perhaps to get a refresher on, being able to look at those, cognitive differences and comparing them to age-based norms or grade-based norms and so forth. So that has also came is that people, my concern with patterns of strengths and weaknesses, it is a credible approach for sure, but the concern is that folks might be going in that direction because of their concern with their multi-tiered systems of supports, the MTSS models. Is there a better model of the models that I'm talking about? Both have strengths, both have concerns. Some states use them both together, RTI with patterns of strengths and weaknesses. But the fact is that states varied in consistency. States like agencies of education were providing the guidelines on, specific approaches and practices. But again, they had less variability than we do with how Vermont approaches multi-tiered systems of supports. So we're a little bit unique in that sense when we're comparing ourselves to other states. We do have an overview of our the interviews that were conducted with other states this summer that I'm happy to share your way if you just want to take a glimpse of what other states are doing in terms of resources, training. But no, we consider those findings very carefully in the work that we've been doing and what we continue to do this year.
Okay. Senator Perslick.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Keller. So you don't have any concerns about the rule going into effect on July 1st? As the person that's going to be doing the trainings, helping these schools get ready for this, those that aren't already doing it, do you have any concerns about starting in July or before the school year?
I am concerned by the concerns I've been hearing from the field, that it seems to be fewer are competent and ready to go, and others are struggling with getting general ed, leadership, and special ed all together on board and on the same page. That's gone more slowly than anticipated. And yes, there are things as an agency we can and will do about, messaging this and showing how it is not, solely a special ed initiative. So I do have, I think those are valid concerns that it wasn't, not all the folks were at the table that should be. With that said, there's also time, where we do have the resources that we've been sharing. We continue to have office hours with the field and, implore teams to come out so we can review these resources with them. And again, the coaches, consultants, the trainers, the folks that we have vetted and identified, they're ready to go. They're ready to go help Vermont schools in any way, whether it's school by school or regionally. And I've talked personally with these experts and explained our situation, but it hasn't been on me to ensure that districts are reaching out. But I have been messaging you can use your IDEA and ARP funds towards this effort. They can also utilize what's called Coordinated Early Intervention Services, CEIS, which is another IDEA, where you can use a portion of your IDEA dollars specific to non-identified struggling learners who are going through tiered, like early intervention supports. And you can use those funds for not only direct practice and direct intervention, but for the professional development. So that's another funding stream that's available to districts. And actually on Monday, we're doing a live office hour session specifically on how to activate those funds for this particular purpose.
Senator Lyons.
So I just want to sort of rephrase what I'm hearing you say is that you are hearing concerns and that there are folks out there who think that they're not ready to comply with the rules. But I'm also hearing you say that there are resources available, including from your office, to move people in the right direction and to be ready to go, whether it's in July or September or October. So, so do you believe that you will be able to alleviate the concerns that you're hearing? Are you able to work one-on-one, more or less, with the folks who are expressing those concerns?
Again, great question. We have a strong partnership with our multi-tiered systems of support leads within the agency, who are already working with districts, but have been involved since day one with the special education team on helping prepare districts for this. And it's a matter of reaching out, and us being able, as collaborative partners, go in and provide the guidance or technical assistance necessary to do that. Again, where the systems are so different, I don't have a pulse on exactly how ready, each and every one is, except for the anecdotal information that I get by meeting with directors every other week and with survey data that we have collected where that need has been expressed. This is, and once again, if we're doing this right and well, bringing together general ed and special ed, there is time to do it on our end, but we're also hearing that they're out of professional development days, or their staffing shortage is so dire they're not even sure who to train up because they're not sure who's going to be here after July 1. So there's some other variables too from the COVID-19 that the lingering impact this continues to have on staffing and qualified personnel to implement this work. And I think that's worth noting as well, that is another concern.
Ms. Keller, do you have a sense right now of the schools that are ready to go? Because one of the options that we're considering is if you're ready to go, you're ready to go. If you need an extension, perhaps there's a way to apply for an extension on this.
I mean, to answer your question, like, for folks that I have heard from, I have like, yes, we're ready to go. I have a handful of districts.
Sure. And I'm sorry to interrupt. Is there a way for you to, and we can ask this of the secretary or someone if
Sure.
you're not able to answer it, but is there a way for you to survey schools? I mean, just to give us a number around, I don't know. I suspect superintendents, principals get these surveys all the time. Are people ready to roll something out? I'm just trying to get a number on this, a percentage.
Yes, and with an exact number, I'm reluctant to go there because again, my information is anecdotal and it's based on self-response survey, and it also depends on the respondent of that survey. But I think with our MTSS partners who survey the fields about where they are with MTSS, I think that we can collaborate and come up with a closer.
Could you come back in next week on Thursday, and Daphne will have you in, Daphne, to just give us a snapshot of where the state is looking in terms of preparedness?
I will absolutely go back to my my colleagues today and find out that what is underway or what more we can do by Thursday.
Yeah, that would be great. Just to give us an estimate of what's out there, we would really appreciate that. That would be a huge help to us. And then we could focus and say, all right, there's 10 schools or 20 schools or, who really needs that extra help? Senator Lyons.
No, that's good. I was going to, you asked all the questions.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. So we'll look forward to seeing you next Thursday. Thanks for partnering with us on this. This is great. If you could get us that number, even if you make it up at this point, no, I'm just kidding. we would love it. That would be great.
Somebody's not laughing at
No, I have plenty of data, that's for sure.
No, but sure. That's why we've heard only great things about you from our colleagues in Senate and House Ed, and so your help with this will be great. So we'll look forward to having you in next Thursday.
All right.
Thank you. We'll leave it there for now. We have one more witness committee. Hopefully that'll help just give us some direction on where we're at. And I've heard great things about Jackie, so that's great.
Data, that's
okay. Jackie, we're going to leave it there for now with you. You're welcome to stick around. We just have one more witness who's going to give us a quick overview of some information. But yeah, you'll receive an email from Daphne who will schedule you again for next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great to see you.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Amy. How are you?
I'm good. I have a little bit of laryngitis.
Ms. Wheeler-Sutton, thank you for being with us. You have been on our calendar on again, off again for a while now, and we only have a little over 10 minutes. But I thought you would give us just an overview of the work that you have done in committee. For those of you who haven't had an opportunity to take a look, we're talking about the where is it here? The legislative report, the final report on the task force for equitable and inclusive school environments. It's on our website. I'm just wondering if you could give us an overview of some of the work, who was involved. We could always have you back. But for now, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to come and provide testimony. For the record, I'm Amy Wheeler-Sutton, co-director of the BEST project housed at the Center on Disability and Community Inclusion at the University of Vermont, and I was a member of the task force. Our goal, according to the legislature, was to make recommendations to end suspensions and expulsions for all but the most serious behaviors, and to compile data regarding school discipline in Vermont public and approved independent schools to inform strategic planning, guide statewide and local decision-making and resource allocation, and to measure the effectiveness of statewide and local policies and practices. So it was a very lofty goal of Act 35. And so if you get a chance to review the report, you'll see that it's a very complex issue with a lot of moving parts. You will find that we just referenced the findings section of Act 35 in terms of rationale. There was really no disagreement among the task force that this is a goal that should be a goal of Vermont to reduce exclusionary discipline. And we were tasked to meet 6 times, which we did. However, based on the quantity of the work to be completed and the complexity, we formed subcommittees and ultimately had 20 subcommittee meetings. Kat Gallagher, superintendent, served as the chair of the task force, and all other task force members are listed on page 4 of the report. I believe there was 16 of us, at least to begin with. So today I'll just briefly go over the recommendations, and then please see the full report. And I created a slideshow of the report for this, the rest of the information. Okay, so, and just there's a section on definitions, which I normally would just skip over. But it is important to note that every time we use the term school in this report, we're referring to public schools, approved independent schools, and pre-qualified pre-kindergarten programs. So our recommendations really apply to all children enrolled in any kind of environment that is receiving public education dollars. And there is some confusion over what is defined as early childhood education, pre-kindergarten education. It has as defined in the Vermont Learning Standards is a little bit different about ages. So there's more detailed information about that within the report. But overall, our recommendations from the task force are to really couch any of these recommendations in the current context of Vermont schools right now. As Jackie was just referring to, schools have very limited capacity right now, serious workforce issues that make any of these recommendations feel somewhat challenging. So while reducing exclusionary discipline is critical, we really feel that any legislative action should really take the form of additional support and strengthening existing initiatives rather than proposing or mandating anything new for schools right now. We really want it to take a supportive approach to be thinking about a sustainable long-term implementation of alternatives to exclusionary discipline and a gradual phased-in approach rather than saying, 2 months from now, this practice needs to be markedly different. And of course, we would hope that any recommendations that are taken forward would be funded with adequate appropriations. So the first recommendation we have is for the legislature to consider whether additional state level staffing is necessary in order to support schools in moving toward a more equitable and inclusive environment that minimizes exclusionary discipline. So we have some examples of what a role or more than one role at the Agency of Education could include in order to make gains in this area. Some related to data and some related more to content and overseeing alignment of initiatives that are related to this topic. We also recommend the formation of an interagency committee that would examine the intersections between several departments across the state, like the Agency of Education, Department of Mental Health, Department of Health, Human Services, Office of Racial Equity, as they all connect to this topic and have people with a lot of expertise that can contribute to this. But really what we found is that additional resources are really needed beyond what was allowed in Act 35 in order to accomplish the goals of the Act. The way the data was asked for within Act 35 did not necessarily illuminate any disproportionality between student groups. What we discovered was the Holcomb reports from 2015 and 2017, the way the data was asked for those years, really helped shine a light on where there were some discrepancies between how different student groups were treated in terms of exclusionary discipline. So we have some recommendations around how the data could be asked for in the future, some additional data sources that could be used. And then the legislature needs to consider whether, or we would recommend the legislature consider whether it's a priority to collect behavioral data from all students in schools that are accepting public dollars, because right now there's very limited or no data coming from approved independent schools or pre-qualified pre-kindergarten programs. So our report does not include data from those sources. So if the legislature were to decide that those would be a priority, adequate resources and accountability measures would need to be allocated and developed for that data to be collected. You might remember that moving forward, the Agency of Education is going to be expected to provide a report to the legislature each year starting in 2025 on exclusionary discipline. However, due to the complexity of the data analysis that is required and the reporting requirements, the task force would like the legislature to consider recommending and supporting with appropriate adequate appropriations that the AOE contract with an outside organization that has the requisite equity-oriented quantitative skills and is really facile with large-scale statewide educational data sets, rather than expecting the Agency of Education to take this on as an additional reporting requirement. And if that were possible, we would recommend that qualitative data is also collected from students and families who have experienced exclusionary discipline or alternatives to exclusionary discipline to show the power.
Does that need legislative action, or could the agency just go ahead and do that on its own, recognizing they might not have the capacity?
I'm not sure how that would work, and I'm not sure whether they would have the funding to put out a bid for that.
Okay, thank you.
And then we have some other recommendations that are more for the Agency of Education or for schools. So I won't go through those, but they're outlined in the report. And then we were asked to look at what other states do in regard to exclusionary discipline. So we have some recommendations around that in relation to creating a mechanism in which schools that have high out-of-school suspension rates or have significant gaps between student groups would be required to review and address their discipline policies within their continuous improvement planning process. Many states also have a statewide school climate survey, which Vermont originally considered and then moved away from being able to offer a statewide school climate survey. So we would recommend that the Agency of Education reconsider this and potentially establishing some kind of state level restorative approaches coordinating council that would oversee restorative approaches in Vermont schools. We were also asked to recommend what are the most serious behaviors that would still constitute or be eligible for exclusionary discipline, which required a lot of conversation. And what we really want to stress is that none of us on the task force were there to be lawyers. And so we want to ensure that legislative council would review any recommendations to make sure that there is no conflict between existing law or statute, federal or state, to anything that we are recommending. We definitely think there needs to be further study about drug and alcohol abuse, use, possession, and distribution. We weren't sure where those should fall in terms of most serious behaviors. And there arose an issue related to informal removals where students are sent home, midway through the day. The school doesn't really record it as a suspension. They just say, your child's not safe to be here. The rest of the day, please come and pick them up. They're not calling it a suspension, so it's not recorded as a suspension, but technically it is a suspension. So more attention needs to be drawn to that matter. Additional training on implicit bias, as that factors into how students are received in terms of exclusionary discipline. And then there was a member of the public who came to several meetings that we just wanted to make sure his concern was heard about disciplinary record expungement. So that wasn't a part of our work, but we wanted to make sure his concern was heard that there is not a great process for expunging disciplinary records. So what we came to after much conversation was that the most serious behaviors that, after considering all of their alternatives and supports, should remain eligible for suspension or expulsion, depending on the context and the intensity of the behavior. So, a kindergartner threatening someone with scissors is very different than, a high school student walking in with a knife. But possession of firearm at school, hazing, harassment, and bullying, sexual harassment, et cetera, and any behaviors that pose an imminent and substantial risk of emotional or physical harm or injury. And the AOE is currently working on guidance around that language. However, none of those would, unless otherwise specified in law, would require a suspension or expulsion. Those would just still be eligible. We also talked about whether there should be a list of behaviors that should not be considered eligible. So for instance, inappropriate language or dress code, should it be in law or statute that those schools cannot suspend? But by the time of the end of the task force, we did not come to a consensus about whether that was possible. So we just recommend that that should be revisited in future years. We compiled a really great list of professional development programs, supports, services, best practices that are available to schools in Vermont, and really support the strengthening of those existing programs and initiatives, rather than trying to, chase after the next shiny object. We really recommend additional funding for school mental health, which I know is being addressed in the legislature right now. But funding that would allow mental health clinicians and other support staff to be able to provide support downstream. So not just for the students who are already experiencing behaviors that are challenging, but pushing that support down to tier 1 so that all students are receiving social emotional learning supports and mental health supports. But the funding mechanism makes that challenging right now. We were asked to look at services, particularly for kids under 8, and we know that that is also being taken up in the legislature right now. So we didn't spend as much time on that because of the charge from the legislature for another stakeholder group to handle kind of the early childhood suspension expulsion practices. And lastly, I just want to name a caution that we found. The Oregon legislature in 2015 limited the use of exclusionary discipline for certain grade levels. And in 2021, a study found that office discipline referrals that resulted in exclusionary discipline actually increased following the policy reform, and particularly for Black students. So we just want this to be a reminder that, policy change in and of itself is likely not sufficient. It really needs to come with professional development and support for schools to be able to implement these changes. So like I said, going forward each year, the Agency of Education is going to be submitting a written report. We hope you'll consider all of the recommendations that are listed in the report. The report really constitutes a great deal of work from many, many people. And that if you were to choose to pursue any of those recommendations, to really dive into that section of the report for further information and, what we talked about related to that. And we hope this report will lead Vermont in the direction of limiting exclusionary discipline, creating more inclusive and equitable learning environments for our students. And other members of the task force would be more than willing to come in and testify to lend their expertise if requested. Thank you for your
Committee
time.
questions. So this is very helpful. I'm going to leave it with committee members to digest it. It's really well written. I would highly recommend committee members go through it. And I think maybe you and I, Ms. Wheeler-Sutton, could have a conversation sometime soon, perhaps tomorrow or early next week, around anything in particular that you think the legislature needs to put in place this year. We already have things going. As you know, we did the exclusionary discipline bill last year regarding, I believe it's children under 8 years of age. We have these reports coming, but is there anything else? It sounds like one of the things is, has to happen is the agency needs to review this, and we have to get it to schools and teachers And so that perhaps there might be some ways that we might be able to be helpful. It's a great report. Committee, any questions? Anything else?
Just a procedural question for
Please,
you.
yeah.
So we've heard the report now. What is our responsibility with it? Do we have to vote to accept it, or do we have to?
It's a great question. No, so these are the kinds of legislative reports that we ask for over the years, and they come in. It's an opportunity for us to take some of their research and either act on it basically or not. I hate to see reports get done and then just sort of pile up. So it's just good to sort of go over and see what's in them and see if there's anything we could have takeaways now. Go ahead.
So what if we disagreed with a portion of it after hearing it? What do you do with it at that point with a report like this? Nothing, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, you can certainly engage Ms. Wheeler Sutton, ask questions, how they got there, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we can always have Ms. Wheeler Sutton back in.
I don't know if it's necessary. We can have maybe a little more committee discussion. I'm really gonna dig in tonight.
Yeah, okay,
There's
great.
a couple red flags I heard that I thought were a little different, but
Okay.
appreciate all your work, Amy.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
it's terrific. And I think maybe what we can do is plan on having you in for another 15 minutes next week after we've had an opportunity to digest the report a little bit. And you and I can talk about, possible, if there's any need for legislation this year. Senator Lyons.
So just briefly, thank you so much. It's very comprehensive, and obviously there are maybe some shorter term things that we can do, but certainly is a longer term look at what has to happen. So, and as an example, I'm looking at the Title IX issues that are there, and they stretch from early education to higher education. And I don't know what thought you are giving to some of the higher ed things that have been happening as you are looking at the report itself or the information.
Yeah, we were only tasked to look at pre-K through 12. So
Yeah.
we didn't consider Title IX and higher ed. Yeah.
Right, but it's a continuum of need, and so, but acting at lower grades would help prevent problems later on.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's another one of the recommendations, is to really provide adequate funding and support for early MTSS and something called the pyramid model. So a request for proposals actually just came out from the Agency of Education related to that yesterday, I think, to help expand that to more schools in Vermont to really get at that preventative approach.
Perfect.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler Sutton.
Thank
Very
you so
much
much.
appreciate it. And I'm going to ask Daphne to find maybe 10 minutes for the two of us to talk on Monday, and then we'll also have you in for a few minutes, 15 minutes next week. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Committee, tomorrow we're going to hopefully wrap up a lot of our work on 3 bills having to do with military families. And we'll possibly, my hope is to vote the final bill out next week. We're also going to do some work on PCBs, career technical schools, and adult education and literacy funding. Okay. Daphne, I think you can take us offline. Everybody have a